Hey, this is Rabbi Zev Bennett.
And Ariella Anishi.
Welcome to episode 4.
Nope, 5.
Wow, so close. Episode 5 of Embodied Torah. This episode is essentially entitled Embodied Tefila. Is that an accurate title? Or is that what we're saying?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Why is it Embodied Tefila, Ariella?
Well, we had a specific request from a listener. Thank you. We started in our alignment episode talking about what it is to be in alignment, and that's really the goal of Tefillah. And one of our listeners reached out and asked for more information, more theoretical and practical tools about what does it mean to be embodied in Tefillah, what does it mean to be connected to our neshama, connected to Hashem, and how do we use the Tefillah that Chazal put together for us to accomplish that.
That's awesome. First of all, to all the listeners, if you have any requests, you now see there is a way to get what you want on the show. So definitely reach out and do that. You can hit up Ariella or me. Or you can just leave things in the comments also. So that's obviously really awesome. The alignment episode, if you didn't see that episode yet, don't worry. This is going to still be pretty intelligible even without that, but obviously we always recommend watching all the episodes. So the alignment concept here is really, like you said, it's Tefillah, and specifically how do we access embodiment within the practices of Tefillah that we do, that are Chazal practices, which I think is, that's just really cool, because a lot of times we think of, unfortunately, a lot of these, like we discussed in earlier episodes, like the yoga concepts and all these ideas are like a little bit more new age in some people's minds. And then we have the Chazal and the Siddur, and that's like old age, antiquated and archaic. And really it's actually that they're plugging into the same mechanics and the same systems. And if you access that, then it's a really cool shiluv combination of these two things.
It's both in the yoga tradition and in our tradition, there is both movement and awareness and tefillah taking place, and it's interwoven together. We use movement in order to awaken or quiet the mind, the body, so that we can be more in connection with our neshama, with our higher self.
It's funny because I think, the movements are like the sitting, the standing, the bowing, all these things. I'm just like remembering just when I was teaching in schools or when I was in school myself, and like the sitting and standing bit, all of that is like, I think for a lot of people, it just ends up being like being told what to do, move here, do this, do that, which is the ultimate of not embodiment, which is, So you can think of this as we're trying to fix that a little bit right now. This is a tikkun for the damage that maybe, I would say definitely a lot of us, maybe most of us, maybe even all of us have suffered at the hands of a tefillah system in which we attempt to institutionalize that which is the most personal, an unfortunate problem in the education space, and seemingly a problem that is almost insurmountable because the two are not really meant for the same context. I don't know if tefillah should ever be in an educational institution.
Did you get grades on tefillah?
Sure did.
Yep.
I was also
That's the
part
most
of
insane thing
ever.
Yeah,
I was a part of a system when I was teaching that there were all kinds of attempts to quantify and evaluate people's tefillah progress, and I don't think I ever once felt like it was a good idea. Meaning, I don't think there was. I don't want to say there is nothing redeeming, because it's hard to say that there's a situation which is completely irredeemable. But I think it's close. Like we're like 99% irredeemable.
Yeah.
So that's that's what we're gonna try to do, to fix that a little bit and
heal it.
Heal it, exactly. To heal the sore and the damage and what's going on over there. So I guess before we actually started this episode, Ariel was telling me something which was new to me, which is that apparently there are more than 5 senses. So that's an important piece of information, just as a good background for how to think about all of these sensory or body or embodiment experiences that are almost sometimes so implicit in what we're doing in tefillah that we don't even pay attention to them. So maybe Ariella can just give us a little bit of an intro on that, and then we can start to build that into the tefillah side of it.
Yeah. So when we think about how we perceive the world, our existence in this world, ourselves, we usually default to the basic 5 senses. So seeing, hearing, tasting, smelling, touching.
Right.
But there's more.
Mm-hmm.
There's more. There's at least 8, but really you can expand it beyond this list of 8. But the 3 that I really want to bring into our awareness is our vestibular sense, our sense of balance, of being upright, that's governed by the inner ear. thank God we can tell when we're upright. The head always wants to be center, and the body will contort itself as needed in order for the head to be level. Because that's how we perceive the world with the least confusion possible. But we also have our proprioception, which is our sense of where our body is in space. So I know that I'm reaching my hand out towards the camera, and I know that my other hand is behind my head.
So you can place where these things are.
So I can decide, I have an awareness of where I'm moving myself in space.
Right.
Which some people don't have.
Right.
Or it can be affected by different experiences, internal or external. And then possibly the most profound one that I really want to bring to our awareness is our sense of interoception. Not interception, nice. Interoception.
A football term.
Yes.
Something else.
So interoception is our ability to perceive what is happening within our own body. So when you're hungry and your stomach is rumbling, or when you're feeling excited or nervous and your heart is fluttering, or your blood is racing, your heart is pounding, or for those who have more subtle and fine-tuned interoception, you can be aware of tension being held in your liver, anger or constriction or flow, anything that's happening within your own body.
Right.
And I know a lot of what I do in yoga therapy in my clinic with people is teaching them how to observe what is happening within our own bodies, because we get our thoughts are so loud. But we have the ability to tune in and notice the subtle shifts that are taking place within our bodies, and we can then work with that, with our breath, with tefillah, with our thoughts, to find more harmony and balance.
Right. That's very cool. I mean, this is just, again, this was like a general introduction just from the embodiment place, just to sort of give an idea of what embodiment kind of includes all of these different aspects. But I just think it really never fails. I think there are these things that we learn when we're like 5 or 10, and we just throw them around, and they're almost always such an oversimplification.
Always.
And like, I want to say always also, again, twice now, there's been a situation of saying almost like an extreme, like black and white, like this is irredeemable. And this example, it's like always things that we learn when we're younger, there's always more to them. I mean, like a situation where we've learned there are 5 senses. And as you're just articulating that, I'm like, of course there are more than 5 senses, because it's similar to something we discussed a few episodes ago about how the body can be broken apart into like infinite components almost, and how there's 248 positive mitzvot that correlate to 248 parts of the body, but every mitzvah can be broken apart into many sub-mitzvahs, or can be compiled into one giant mitzvah.
Right.
And it's the same thing here. It's like, of course we have so many different senses of awareness of what's going on in our body, and sometimes we lack awareness, and learning to develop the awareness and actually activate it in areas that I'm sure so many people feel this way, that we're out of touch with our bodies when we should be in touch with them, just because as you said, our thoughts are very loud. Even if you're just overthinking something and stressing about it, and then you're sitting in a weird position and your body is suffering from that, and you don't even realize it's happening because we're so embedded in what it is that we're doing. And there's a million examples of that, people not even knowing they have to go to the bathroom, like just ongoing endless examples of not being aware of what's going on in our bodies. And so obviously that's really it's such a clear description of like even just the sense of whether you're upright or not. It's such a basic sensory phenomenon that we all use.
And we take it for granted
completely.
But once we bring our awareness to it, then we can, first of all, be grateful for it, which is such an important part of Tefillah, being grateful for the fact that we function and that we can thrive and we can flourish in this body and in this world. But also, I just lost my train of thought.
All right. Well, it's also part of the body.
Choo-choo.
It is a train, exactly. Well, I guess we can just take some of these ideas and just we can roll them on the train of thought to the next
Let's
stop, which I think probably the easiest thing to talk about is just like first just physical movements, like we mentioned, like standing up, sitting down, things like that are just. These are often just in the background of Tefillah. I think there's like different areas of struggle with Tefillah itself. There's the Siddur. There's boredom that people sometimes feel or repetitiveness of the Siddur, and there's different parts of the Siddur. And there's also just the environment, which is obviously things like just being, if you're going to shul, to the synagogue or whatever, like that's one piece of the environment. If you feel, then there's also your interior environment, just in terms of things that you're feeling on a given day. But then there's just like in some ways, almost the most subtle, which is just the movements themselves. Like, are you moving while you're doing tefillah? And then there's halachic bowing, things like that. So maybe let's just start with the bowing and try to
Let's do it.
Concretize that a little bit, what exactly it is, and then how to fit it into this larger structure. How's that sound?
Let's do it.
All right. So I guess so maybe I'll just give like a quick overview for a second of like the concept of bowing in halacha, and then or do you want to talk about it first?
I think before we go into bowing, actually, we just need to talk about standing for a moment.
Okay,
We've touched upon this in some of our previous episodes, the alignment, and even the perm episode, where the relationship of the support of the earth and the force of gravity holding us, right? So when we're standing, we can be propping, we can be holding ourselves up, or we can be in a state of collapse where we're sitting on the chair and we can't even bring ourselves to stand up.
Right.
And so just being in a state of standing before we go into the movement of bowing, what's the relationship of, what's the level of effort that I'm putting in? How much am I surrendering that effort to Hashem and letting Hashem hold me here through the forces that He created of the support of the earth and gravity? And I know for myself, when I find that place where I can let my shoulders soften and I can allow my spine to come into its natural curvature, the ability to access my voice, the ability to breathe more deeply, the ability to quiet my mind, all becomes so much more accessible. So before we go into any kind of movement, just finding how we can stand with minimal, I don't know if I want to say minimal effort or maximum support from Hashem.
Right.
Right? Allowing Hashem to hold us, allowing Hashem to breathe us. And just being aware of that. It's, on the one hand, it's the simplest thing. You're just standing, right? In yoga, we call it Tadasana, mountain pose. And everyone's like, okay, this is the easy one. I'm like, no, this is actually one of the hardest poses to do, because it's, on the one hand, so obvious and so easy, but really to find that place where you're channeling Hashem is not so simple.
Right, it's easy but not easy.
Yeah,
exactly.
So just starting off by becoming aware of how much weight are my feet allowing to go into the earth.
Right.
How much of that support is rising back up through my body, and then engaging with tefillah from that place.
Okay, so I guess so let's look at it like this. Maybe this is a good way to describe it. It's like there's a lot of parts of tefillah, like the just following the procedures of the Siddur, where we're sitting, and there are parts where we're standing. And then there's like these, I would even say, anomalous things like bowing. Because bowing is like this, it's not sitting or standing.
Right.
So maybe sitting is a good place to start. Now, I'll just mention that as an example, like in Parshas Toldos, there's like this story about how Yitzchak is he wants to give a bracha, whatever that is, to his son Esav. So the way he does it is he basically is like, oh, bring me food, and then once I eat, then I'll be full, then I can give you a bracha. And there's like this theme in that story, which is not only there's other places also where we find it, but it kind of fits a lot of what we do kind of as Jews nowadays, where we eat in order to celebrate.
Yep.
And it's because eating seems to be this thing that it's relieving. In other words, we're hungry, we feel stress in our bodies, our bodies require sustenance to regenerate, to strengthen themselves, and when we eat, we also enjoy that. And there's a pleasure to the taste of the eating, which is and pleasure essentially is the relief of the tension of wanting something and then getting it. And so I always felt like, for me, sitting in tefillah always triggered those kinds of thoughts, because it's like, you get to school or shul or whatever, and then like you're getting ready, you're standing, whatever, and then when you can sit down, it's like, okay, exactly. Now we can just chill a little bit. Yeah. And so like that almost feels like it starts off being like this release and this relief process that's going on in the background, and then, and this is just me personally describing my experience for a second, but I wonder how universal this is. At a certain point, when you're sitting for a while, so you get so relaxed that you start to space out, because now you're just kind of like, you've just been sitting for a while. And then when you stand up from that, it kind of wakes you up. And then it triggers like activation of some kind. So, and then it almost feels like maybe that's like a pattern. Like there's like a flow going on from like sitting to sitting again for Kriya Shema, then standing again for Shemona Esrei, and then sitting again for Chazaras HaShatz, maybe.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, what's interesting is if we talk about standing, so what's the source of support for the body? Just through the feet.
Right.
Once you're sitting, you have way more sources of support. And the nervous system is able to settle a little bit because the nervous system, the musculoskeletal system, everything is a little bit more supported. You have to use a little bit less effort in order to keep yourself upright.
Right.
And that opens up the mind to be able to wander a little bit more easily. Mm-hmm. And so this sway, this movement from sitting to standing is be comfortable, but
right.
also stay engaged. And it's powerful. I'm just thinking about years ago when I was dealing with some serious illness, and standing up from a chair was, without someone's help, was not really possible.
Right.
And it was really, my mind went into a very judgmental place of you're not supposed to be sitting for this part of davening, stand up.
Right.
And it took me a while to like let go of those inner critic judgmental voices. And even while I was sitting, I said, okay, I'm sitting, but mentally, emotionally, energetically, I'm standing. Right? So even if we're not physically able to stand up for a specific part of tefillah, we can bring ourselves into an energetic, mental, emotional state of standing, even if we're still sitting.
That's awesome. I love that. Yeah. I mean, I actually had to give counseling and advice to people over at different situations where they felt those types of feelings, the self-judgment of like, I'm not standing, and just telling them like, that's not the halacha. Like, you're not supposed to stand if you're sick to that extent.
Yeah.
Obviously, it's not even a question. And people just feel like, well, I want to do the right thing, but that's not the right thing, because halacha is it's not just like a fixed system. It's a way to be in your circumstances.
Right.
Like in the moment, what are you, and what are you meant to be doing, and what can you do? And so, but that example is so profound, because it just basically articulates that if these are tools to activate, they're body tools to activate internal processes, so then you don't necessarily have to use the body to do that in cases where you can't. So
I think I would take it one step further. There's the external pressure of this is what I'm supposed to do, mm-hmm. right? Even if it becomes an internal pressure of this is what I'm supposed to do. But I think that there's an internal desire of this is what I'm familiar with. Mm-hmm. These are the habits that I've created. I know myself in tefillah, in this movement, in this position, and I can no longer access myself in this scenario. Right. But there's also an opportunity here. Hashem, when we are in a place of illness, where we're prevented from being able to get up, to stand up with ease, with comfort, with stability, we're meant to be resting. We're meant to be doing some sort of internal work, internal healing. And we're often so focused on the physical healing, right? But there's spiritual healing that's able to take place. How can I let go of the thoughts, my preconceived notions of what's supposed to be, and allow what is right now in this moment to shine, to heal? Right.
Yeah, that's really cool. I love the idea of learning to do something without doing it. I just think that's really interesting. Yeah. So also noteworthy is that these patterns of sitting and standing or whatever, they also track specific parts of the things that are in the Siddur. So, for example, we sit for most of Sukkot Zimra, but then for the back end of it, like the second half, then we stand. And there's also a shift there in Sukkot Zimra itself, where it's parts of Tehillim, and then it's mainly just quotes of psukim. And then it culminates with like Az Yashir. And I think, again, like this is kind of like one of my teachers, right, David Foreman, has this phrase he uses called the Lullaby Effect, which is like things that we've said a million times, so they lull us to sleep at this point. But like if you kind of read the Chumash without ever having seen it before, meaning pretending that you're erasing it from your mind, Az Yashir is like this pinnacle situation.
Absolutely.
Which, like, imagine
Bring
like
me my tambourine.
right, like imagine just like every day, like reviewing like the most profound experience of your life. Like that could be a very, very intense thing to start your day with and kind of orient yourself. And Psukkah de Zimra is actually it's all supposed to relate to the layer of emotions. In other words, you could think of it as the section of conviction, because it's really it's analogous to Olam HaYetzirah, which is like that's the emotional level or the intentionality level, the conviction level of our being and of Hashem's being in the world. So I just like that. So the sitting for part of it, which makes sense because it's like you're relaxing, you're just feeling and being and sort of singing from a place of, you're actually supposed, in halacha, you're supposed to actually say the words of Sukkot Zimra like very slowly and like just kind of like let them flow. But then you've got to stand up and suddenly you're starting a completely different phase, and now it's like you're activating yourself in almost like an excitement type of emotional state. And that's like that just I'm just thinking this out loud right now. I'm kind of, again, I never really thought about this until I'm saying it now.
Yeah.
That the standing really parallels that. In other words, you're now standing to do Az Yashir and the psukim that lead up to it that are like reviewing everything that we are with Hashem, Him saving us, and it's like now we're on fire to then do the next part, which is then Berachos Kriya Shema, which is like a whole different thing entirely. It's not singing at all. It's like a specific mitzvah with preparations and particular meanings, and so this is all like emotional catalyzation. Is that a word? Catalyzation? It's a better word. Catalysting? No, it's maybe catalyzation. There's a better word than that, but it's like it just ignites all of that, it feels like. Does that make sense?
The way you describe it, it felt a little bit like disjointed, that we're going from this state to this state.
Yeah.
But I actually think that there's a calmness and a flow that we can bring into the activation of standing up and Az Yashir, that it doesn't have to be this kind of energy. It can be a more subtle awakening, a more supportive and calm awakening, and being in that kind of flow.
Right. Yeah, I definitely depicted it in a disjointed way.
Yeah.
I was kind of living that, but it doesn't have to be that way, that's for sure. Yeah, I mean, conceptually, these things should definitely flow. I actually need to, now that I'm just saying this out loud, I feel like I need to do a little more research into, there really are two halves to Psukkah de Zimra, and they're broken in half by like a bunch of phrases that are designed to be a demarcation. So I'm curious what the underlying dynamics are for that, because it's supposed to be one layer. In other words, that's supposed to all be Olam HaYetzirah. So like there's two different pieces to that. So I feel like there's probably a reason for that. Okay, well,
more to come.
Exactly, be that as it may. So I guess with that as like a dynamic mechanics side of it, so then Shemona Esrei itself is also this very interesting thing. I mean, compare Shemona Esrei, like sitting during Kriya Shema, and then going into Shemona Esrei, which is standing. But it seems like it's different now, because Kriya Shema, the dynamics of sitting there are supposed to be like, or at least the dynamics of Kriya Shema intrinsically are about trying to build out from what we just came through, which is the Psukkah de Zimra, like sort of seeing who Hashem is relative to us, and like trying to see that emotionally, to then like saying, okay, and now we have to access the beginning of the unifying of ourselves with Hashem. That it's like, even though we saw Hashem saving us, Hashem took us out of Mitzrayim, Hashem created the world, all the things that we say in Psukkah de Zimra, now it's like, but us and Hashem, we're actually one. So we start to like look at that by saying Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad, which is basically the idea of like, well, we are part of this larger thing, and it's all one giant story that we're kind of inside of. Yeah, so a thing about Shema in terms of sitting versus standing that I think is important to mention here is that saying Shema slowly is like a thing that you're supposed to say it slowly, meaning like say all the words. You're actually supposed to say it with the simanim, like the trup.
Yeah.
And it's supposed to be like a process that you kind of do. I don't say just incrementally, smoothly almost. And the Gemara has this language there about like how in Maseches Brachos about how like people who can't do that, then they're like tasting the fire of Gehinnom, something like that. I can't remember the exact language it uses, but it references it like with Gehinnom. So the reason is because the theme of Shema seems to be that it's about trying to uproot the conception that we have of what's called Shtei Reshuyot. that like there's two domains. There's the domain of good and the domain of evil, and that's a Christian concept basically, that there is Hashem, and then there is Hashem's opposite, his counterpart that like he's in battle with,
right?
Which is really just us. Like we are actually experiencing reality as if there are two opposing forces. There's good and evil, and so but Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad is that there's nothing outside of Hashem. Even the things that are bad are part of the story, and they give context, like we spoke about with the Purim episode. They give context for us to be able to do things that matter, because there's actually the option of doing things that are distorted. And so with Shema, it seems to be like this, like you're supposed to let yourself casually, almost in a very like relaxed kind of way, allow yourself to see the world that way. And it's almost like Shabbos. You're trying to like let go of the obsessive fixation that we have of that's wrong and this is the right thing and these things cannot ever meet. Instead, it's like you're supposed to almost like, again, a little psukkah is in revive of like singing. That's what we say with the simanim, to like enter the headspace of the unification, which is like olam habriya, essentially, which is Shema. So that could be maybe what the sitting dynamic is.
Yeah, it's also like a receiving of this reality, this flow, this connection.
Right, exactly.
And once we receive it, then we can have the audacity to stand up in front of Hashem, b'chidut.
Right.
What, face to face.
Yeah, exactly. Actually, that leads in nicely into the bowing. Before we get to that, let's lay out the Shemona Esrei part. But yeah, I think that's like when Shemona Esrei starts, like the whole process of Shema is like we try to create that, and then we end off with the bracha of Gal Yisrael, which is like the Geula is like the freeing, right? It's like now we made it out of like the narrow space of Mitzrayim, exactly, the Mitzrayim again, of like this is bad, this is good, I understand everything in its categories. Instead, it's like we're above all the categories now. We see everything beyond that. That's Olam HaBriya. And then at the end of that, it's like, okay, so now we can really fuse with Hashem into Olam HaAtzilut, which is like the eitzelness,
moving out of slave mentality,
right,
and into being worthy of standing up in front of Hashem.
Right, exactly, because now we're actually, and now we're actually like Hashem's Fatay Tiftach, like the phrase that we say in the beginning of Shemona Esrei, Ufi agiti latecha. It's like, Hashem, you open my lips, and then I will say the reflections of you. Which is hilarious if you think about like just the language there. It's like, well, who's doing it? Is it Hashem doing it, or is it you doing it?
Yes.
And the answer is yes. Like we spoke about with like this dynamic of like, that's Moshe is the one who reached that completely all the time. He's in a state of constant real tefillah like that, which is where he was simply him and Hashem channeling as him simultaneously in this paradoxical oneness. So then here, that's what we're saying at the beginning of Shemona Esrei. We're basically saying, it's you, it's me, we're one, and
open me up to let your praise flow through me.
Right, and we basically traversed the Shema dynamic. So now when we're standing, because now we're Hashem in the world. It's like, just to use the language of the Ramban in Parshas Vayishlach, when he says, the language there is that the pasuk says, Vayikra, Hashem calls Vayikra lo El Elokei Yisrael, that Hashem calls Yaakov El. And the Ramban there basically describes how it's this. It's like when you are a channel for Hashem, so then you're a power now. You're an L. You're a vector. You're like you're someone who's doing something. So that's why we stand, because it's like that seems like it really fits, right? Like that all makes sense. And
yeah.
So with all of that, so then so now the question is like, okay, so I guess bowing within that.
I mean, the standing of the Amidah is different than the standing that we did before, right?
Right.
It's with our feet together. We're not moving around. We're not swaying around. I mean, there's the shuckling that people do, but it's a much, on the one hand, more stable because we're not moving around.
Right.
But also less stable because your feet are together and your center of gravity is much.
That's cool. Right.
So it requires a quieting of the mind to. A focusing, a gathering of the senses, if you will, to be able to be present in that space without falling over.
Right. Yeah, that's interesting. Just how the way our feet are positioned, it actually is inherently destabilizing. It's designed to make it that we are immobile, essentially, that we can't move, and that we're like the malachim who are essentially they are fixed as channels for Hashem's presence in a particular form. So we're essentially now trying to operate for some temporary period as a particular channel of Hashem's form. It's not really the right word, but like Hashem's self into the world in that way. So I think that what's interesting about the standing and with all these things, these all sort of serve as tactics for how to think about our body's position throughout tefillah. In other words, sitting in one way for Psukei Zimra, which is like a relaxing sitting, versus like which is for the emotional freedom, emotional release. Then there's standing for the second part of that, which unclear exactly what that is, whether it's to activate to be more excited or to be more activated in the process of emotional conviction in some form. And then Birchos Kriya Shema is sitting to essentially allow ourselves to receive the oneness of Hashem and to not be so attached to the Gehenna dynamic. Just to clarify that also, by the way, Gehenna is essentially the feeling of futility that derives from constantly viewing existence as these oppositional forces of good and evil.
Right.
Because it's this feeling that what we do is essentially it's almost like a war that can't be won, as opposed to sort of seeing it as one giant story that actually has something beyond it. The futility of existence is powerfully embodied in that perspective. So being able to relax to receive that, and then standing this way in the Shemona Esrei part of it, which is essentially a completely different kind of standing. Just like a standing to fuse with Hashem, to act as almost like an antenna. Yeah. It's like you're a lightning rod, right? Like you're trying to attract Hashem through you.
Exactly. I think it's interesting. You're emphasizing the sitting and the standing, but if we go back to what we talked about in I think it was episode 2, the breathing episode, we have 4 parts of the breath, right? We have the inhale, and then there's a little pause. And then we have the exhale, and then there's a little bit of pause. So I can't help but wonder if all of this movement is to creating these opportunities to break out of, to realign, to refocus,
like
reset
states.
Intention. Like,
right.
Okay, you've been sitting, now where's your breath? What's happening in the synapse? What's happening in that space in between? Mm-hmm. Are you just going on autopilot, or is there an opportunity has your mind wandered? Sometimes you're sitting for a while and you can be saying the words, but your mind is actually somewhere else, and then you shift states, and it creates this little opportunity to be, okay, nope, here I am again. Here are my thoughts. Here's my awareness. Here's my intention. And really using those quite literally through the breath. I know before I start my Amidah, I take my 3 steps back, and I always take a full breath in and out. And I become aware of my mind in a different way and my body in a different way. And sometimes I'll be like, I'm not ready to step forward and stand in front of Hashem yet. I need to take another breath.
Right.
And really making sure that we're not falling into the trap of autopilot, but we're using our embodied awareness to be as present as we possibly can be.
Right. I think it must be all of those things. It makes total sense that it would be. I think I try to articulate it this way. I like to concretize it for myself a little bit, because I like to link things to the themes of the Siddur itself, mm-hmm. because I think that there are distinctions. Like Birchos Kriya Shema has brachos before, brachos after, psukim in the middle. Psukei Zimra, bracha before, bracha after, psukim in the middle. So, but it seems like, this is really, I just stole this from Rav Kook. This is like when he describes some of this in his commentary on the Siddur. So like, he's not the only person. The Kabbalah-wise, this is all over the Zohar, but like the idea essentially of like, that each of these pieces of the Siddur have like different correlate phases of the olamot, like the layers of existence. So that's, I think, I like to try to link those together as much as I can to really see what it is. But I think that what you're saying is what you're illustrating is that a lot of it really just depends on the person, where they're at that day and in that situation, because the psukim of Shema, the psukim of Psukei Zimra can easily bring you to the headspace of Shema. They can. Yeah. It's built into the words. The psukim of Shema can bring you to the headspace of Psukei Zimra too. There are plenty of ways to do that. The second paragraph of Shema is all about nature. It's about like Hashem taking care of us with rain and sustenance, and it's a very natural side of existence. So it's I think all of these things in many ways are interspersing with each other in our personalized experience, which is also, just by the way, as an important aside, that's when I talk about the Chagim, sometimes we actually did this a little bit with the Purim episode. Like the Chagim are also like, we think of them as like there's specific energies for each one, but you can go through all of the Chagim's energies in the span of 3 seconds on any given day.
Yeah.
So it's about accessing these things and kind of getting good at accessing them and having the awareness and like knowing what each of them is. Like what you're saying, like knowing, okay, so like, well, am I feeling a certain thing right now? Do I need to breathe longer?
That's what the benefit of the repetition is. Right. That we have set tefillah that we say every day. What's changing? Us. Right. And how much are we becoming aware of the subtle shifts that are taking place within us from throughout the day, throughout the week, throughout the month, right, year. But that set structure really lends itself to us becoming aware of how we're shifting and growing or falling and right. growing, because life is like this, right, full of ups and downs, and then we can become more aware of what our spiritual needs are, what our mental emotional needs are, and even what our physical needs are. Because if we are physically in pain, we can't access the mental, emotional, and spiritual growth in its most ideal state. Right. And really acknowledging all of that together and the interplay that they all have with one another.
Yeah, no, I think that's just very spot on, just in terms of how to think about these things. I especially like I've heard that framing of like, we're the ones who are changing, even if the Siddur doesn't. It's a useful framing to sort of reactivate our relationship with some of the language in the Siddur. But I think that it's very powerfully true. In other words, I think unfortunately often when the Siddur is taught, it gets taught as like, this is Tefilla. Like the Siddur is Tefilla, and like if you don't connect to the Siddur, then like you're not doing Tefilla. And it's like the Siddur is a tool for Tefilla. Right. And so then it's like the idea of like reading a poem, for example, which a lot of is what Sukkot Zimmer essentially is you read a poem, so then you can have thoughts, and that you can figure out what you're feeling and why you're feeling it, and to get a sense of what's going on inside yourself. And that's what's supposed to happen here, but not in the sense of like, that it's like it's not self-centric, that like, oh, it's about you. It's not about you either. It's about you in relationship with deeper you, and relationship with other yous, other people, and relationship with larger existence, aka Hashem. And then to be able to use these tools. I mean, you can try to use like a poem from somebody from 200 years ago if you want, but like these are...
Or write your own.
Or write your own, yeah. And I'm not saying that one is better than the other, but these are poems that are written by people who develop the technology, essentially, of consciousness breach and consciousness exposure and consciousness bridge, and like the language itself. And again, unfortunately, because English speakers, we have a harder time with the language, but like, even like the word vayomer, it's like this, like, oh, it just means and he said, but the word amar means to differentiate yourself. And when I speak, I'm literally taking this endless world that I am inside, and I'm putting it into a little package and shipping it out into the world. Like, that's like a tiny, very simple thing that we all do all the time. It is crazy profound. And just that one word, literally, Rashi quotes the Midrash in Parshas Kitavo, where he says that the language there is Laha-Amir, is where it's used there. It's a very weird usage of the Shoresh of Amar. And he says, what does it mean, Laha-Amir? And he says it's a language of distinction. That Hashem singled you out. He differentiated you. And so the word Amar, which is just, it's one of those words that's thrown around everywhere, like, and just thrown into the Chumash in random places. And each time it means that a person is now, they're downloading themselves. I'm sharing myself in a concretized form. So like the Hebrew does that. It's wired to create consciousness awareness. I mean, if instead of me saying the word saying, I said the word consciousness download every time that I was going to speak, I'd be like, I'm about to do a consciousness download. You better believe that everyone's going to start thinking that way when they're around me, or think that I'm crazy.
Probably
or both. Hopefully both. But the point is that, like, in Hebrew, that's exactly what's happening. Like, those are the words that we're using. But because we don't speak Hebrew so well, if we're English speakers, so then we have a harder time just naturally rewiring our minds to actually think those thoughts, which goes back to also the Siddur in general. It's like rewiring our minds and how to think about standing, sitting, all these things. We actually have to like install the connections between the concepts and the actions, because the actions were like improperly installed in the original installation.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Wow.
A lot there, yeah.
A lot there.
All right, let's...
You said you were going to start off with bowing.
I know. I feel like we have to...
And we haven't gotten
there yet. We have to wrap with bowing. So we're going to wrap with bowing.
I think there's going to be a part 2 to this episode. Because there's a lot more that we wanted to touch upon.
We need to talk about speaking, saying words out loud, hearing words, singing. There's a lot of things there. Yes, those are also tefillah things. So we'll wrap with bowing. And then for the next episode, we'll go into the speaking and singing and listening and all these other body things that we do during tefillah that, again, are super subtle, that are just embedded. So I guess what I wanted to say before with the bowing, sort of introducing it, is that when we bow, we're lowering ourselves in a certain way. In other words, it's like this weird in-between between sitting, where you're lower, you're at rest more, but and standing, because you're still standing when you're bowing. So and there's also a couple of different ways to actually do bowing. But the way that I always like to describe this to people, how to think about bowing, is from the word berech.
Right, because there's a bending of the knees.
Right, which is and that's also, it's actually historically people used to bend the knee, tichra berech, as we say in Aleinu, to a king or to a superior person or whatever. And so a lot of times people have an issue with that, because it sounds like, oh, this is a very who's better than whom kind of thing. I'm better than you, you're better than me. It's very hierarchical in a certain competitive type of way, which in today's world that's the cultural currency today is it's all about
we're all equal.
Right. We're all equal because it's extremely insensitive to be better than someone else. But the irony is that we are all equal on the neshama level. In other words, we are all one self, really. Yeah. But in terms of our tools that we each have, we're all completely different. And the concept of bracha and berech is essentially about that. In other words, if there is a person who is, let's say if you have a boss at your job who has all the knowledge and experience, so you can think of them as a well. They have this huge pool or this huge container of everythingness that you need in the context of the tools of that job. And then you want to draw from that into you yourself, which is below them in terms of the abundance of those things. They have more of that, which is why the Rishonim will say the lashon of bracha is lashon ribui. It's the language of more, of there's abundance, there's moreness. Right. And so if you have less than them in that, then they are above you, but not above you in an ego neshama sense.
No, in a place of being able to receive, the water is going to flow from the higher level down, down into the lower level.
And so the concept of it's and it also it purifies an otherwise tainted dynamic. Yeah. Because if you start to think of your boss who knows much more than you on the level of neshama as being above you, then you have a hard time speaking up to your boss, because it's oh, he's better than me on the level of essence, on the level of self, but he's not.
Right.
It's the boss is just someone who has more of something in the realm of things, and that's something which you can benefit from without having anything to do with your assessment of yourself value, as being someone. Exactly. Right. And so it erases insecurity. I mean, it's very powerful, this way of seeing it. So then what ends up coming out of that? I mean, that solves all the sexism things, the racism things, all the isms that are kind of going on are a mixing together of self and attributes. So with that all as a background, so then when you're korea berech, when you basically are bending your knees, what you're doing is you're basically saying, I want to now lower myself before the source of all the moreness that there is, so I can make myself a receiver. Because the way a brecha actually works, a pool is lower, and that's why it can receive. Right.
But it's interesting because when you go to sit down, you're also bending your knees, but your upper body is staying completely the same.
Right.
But when we're bowing down, there's a bending of the knees, but there's also a lowering of the heart.
Right.
And I know based on my influence from yoga practice, I'm always seeking out length throughout my spine, right? Mm-hmm. So when I bow, there isn't a collapse. I'm maintaining spaciousness throughout the heart center, both in the front and the back of the heart, because the openings of the heart are actually in the back of the body, not the front of the body. So when we do heart opening, we actually want to make sure that we're maintaining spaciousness in the back of the heart, which we often forget. But there's a bending of the knees, and then there's a lowering of a heart, not a collapse,
not a hunching,
not a hunching, exactly. Right. And going back to the antenna visual that you gave of standing in the Amidah, that we're really trying to channel Hashem. So if I collapse down, I lose that alignment, that flow, that connection throughout the nervous system, which is the highway of our senses, right? And so it's a little bit different than when you're sitting and you can relax back. There's a lowering of the heart, but then also when you come back up, there's also a filling of the heart, a lifting of the heart. Sometimes I've had this image almost like Hashem is kind of lovingly just saying like, yeah, you can.
Right,
giving
exactly
permission
like
to stand up
like a king.
And thank you, and I'm giving to you, and I'm giving you permission to rise back up with a full heart. You don't have to be full of shame. You don't have to be full of fear. Be the beautiful existence that you are.
That's a benevolent king. In other words, like often we think of a king as somebody on top. Again, the same thing. A person on top who has control of our life, and like they're essentially like we are being dehumanized, right? We are losing our neshama before them. We are now just things. With Hashem, it doesn't work that way. Like an actual melech, a true melech, is the person who views all the people in ein melech below am. We are extensions of him, of his self. So we are powered by him. And so then, and we are now able to be fully activated as powerful selves who are now the messengers of the king, and we walk around with the authority of the king literally radiating out of us. Now, I think, and I think the bowing, like the exactly how you said it, like it's almost like the antenna has to be properly modulated, I would say, because the issue is that that same dichotomy of the neshama and the attributes. Is that the Torah doesn't say you are the neshama and the attributes are just other than you. You're actually the totality of that. Because you can't be an evolving self without attributes that allow you to make progress. So paradoxically, we are both a neshama that is one with Hashem and there is no separation. And at the same time, we have this tzimtzum of these attributes that make us experience ourselves as other than Hashem. And that's both of those are 100% true. So we stand tall as aspects of Hashem, but the problem is that when you stand tall too much, then you start. That's why there's even different opinions in halacha that you're supposed to be a little bit bent to make sure this isn't a problem. But other opinions that say you actually have to stand completely tall because you're supposed to be an antenna, and they're both dealing with the same things.
Some might even say that there's times for these and times for that.
Exactly, and that's what the bowing is, right? The idea of bowing is to say I'm now going to bend myself and look down and put my heart in a lower place to kind of like properly put the attribute side, the side of the body, the side of the separation in its place so it doesn't rise up and push too far the other way. And then I start to say, I can stand tall because I'm someone and it's about me.
Well, I think it also creates an opportunity for us to kind of check in and see, where am I at? Am I functioning from a place of haughtiness, of ego, or have I collapsed a little bit too much?
Right.
And do I think that I'm not worthy? And recognizing where is the body comfortable in these familiar movements that we repeat over and over again, we can learn about ourselves and we can become aware of where we have opportunities for work and healing.
That really shows how all these halachos are designed to take stock of the das tov vara dynamics, where you go a little too far this way because we are capable of it. We can easily veer into a little bit too much of any particular direction. So it's to kind of keep things, all the parts kind of in their place. Essentially alignment.
Balanced.
All right, it's alignment.
Yeah.
All right, that went well. Okay, so we'll wrap with that. But I think for next time we have a bunch of things to come back to for other tefillah body type things, embodiment in tefillah, besides just the actual positions of the body themselves. And we were just discussing, we hopefully will be able to do sometime soon. We have ideas for doing retreats, Shabbatons.
Absolutely. A lot of the concepts that we're talking about, I mean, it's so wonderful that we can do this through audio podcasts and even through visual videos, but being able to spend more than 50 minutes and really open it up and experience and practice different techniques that we can do, Bezrat Hashem, lighting candles and going into Shabbat and into Tefillah from an embodied awareness place is going to be awesome.
Yeah. So
let us know if you're interested.
Keep your eyes peeled for that. There'll be updates about that soon. And if anybody has feedback, again, more suggestions, requests, we're happy to take all those. Check out each of Ariel is yogawithariel.com. Check me out at yesodblocks.com. And Hope you enjoyed this content, and looking forward to having you join us for the next episode.